constitutional level, but it ends up feeding back into this feature of American politics that is so different from Europe, which is the role of the states, federalism, the fact that each state gets to make its own decisions, which has been one of the real engines of the death penalty. So how does it look as we look down the line? Are we likely to see the Supreme Court find the death penalty to be unconstitutional in the way they almost did in Furman versus Georgia? Probably not, at least not for a very long time. There are, I think, a number of pathways that this eventual abolition could take. One, which I would guess, but only guess, is the most likely, is the one we may be on now. And that's where you get more and more states outside of the South, states like California, New Jersey, Illinois, opting to get rid of the death penalty for reasons that combine dissatisfaction with the way it's operated, concern that we're not really getting much crime control value out of the death penalty for the money we spend on it, as well as fiscal pressures. That is the kind of formula that has worked in a number of states and may work in California next November. If that continues, what you end up with is a death penalty that's limited to the Confederacy. One of the things that made the death penalty acceptable in the 1970s is that it was not an all-Southern phenomena. You combine what might be considered the sort of Southern fried version of the death penalty, the Georgia, Virginia, Florida, Texas model, with states like California, Arizona, Washington, that were not classic Southern states with a defined racial agenda around executions, but instead a fear of crime, concern about political rights and popular democracy. Those states are the ones that seem to be moving away from the death penalty now. If we end up with a death penalty that's limited to the South, then it really does begin to look like a cruel and unusual penalty in the sense that it's no longer compatible with national values. Instead, it's a regional practice. And what will it look like then? It will look very much like segregation did in the 1950s, something that is practiced but only in one part of the country. Another possibility is that the Supreme Court will just keep carving out groups and perhaps categories of cases from the death penalty. The next most obvious group would be people who commit their crimes while they're seriously mentally ill. I think it's rather shocking that we still execute people who committed their crimes while everyone agrees they were schizophrenic, but nonetheless the state sought the death penalty against Andrea Yates. The same state, the state of Texas, sought and got the death penalty against a man named Panetti, whose case was finally reversed by the Supreme Court. He killed his father and mother-in-law and represented himself at his death penalty trial while he was seriously mentally ill, including coming to court dressed in a cowboy outfit to cross-examine his wife, his ex-wife, on the stand. A few other things that would indicate that he was not competent to conduct a defense, certainly. Nonetheless, Texas sentenced him to death, but the U.S. Supreme Court decided that he could not be executed, mainly because there was evidence he was still too mentally ill to be executed. Again, it's possible they will decide that all people who are mentally ill at the time of their crimes cannot be held sufficiently culpable for retributive purposes or deterrent purposes. It's hard to see what other carve-outs like that there are. There could be carve-outs around evidentiary issues, like Troy Davis-type cases, a case where there's only the only evidence against somebody is eyewitness evidence that is being retracted or is in some ways undermined by subsequent investigations. You can imagine some kind of partial rule about that. Nonetheless, we're not likely to see that many more like that. I think the bigger issue is the death row phenomena, these long times that people spend on death row, and that's where I'm going to end on in a moment. Before I get there, I want to talk about this issue of American exceptionalism, which we began last week talking about. The notion that America seems alone, especially when we compare it to our typical peers in Europe. Some historians have argued that America simply has a different culture when it comes to justice that is much less oriented toward dignity than Europe is. Historian James Whitman has made that argument in his book Harsh Justice, where he argues that the European tradition has a much more concern with dignity in the treatment of prisoners than the American tradition, going back to the fact that we eliminated our aristocracy at the time of the Revolution, whereas Europe maintained an aristocracy which for centuries demanded different and more honorable punishments, and those were the punishments that eventually became associated with dignified treatment and eventually accorded on an egalitarian basis. In effect, Whitman argues that Europe leveled everyone up to the level of the aristocracy through democratization, whereas America tended to level everyone down to the level of slaves in terms of their rights and their dignity. But this kind of deep historical argument doesn't seem to make sense of the phenomenon that we began with last week, which is that little switch in time that would have made America just like Europe if we had 2 more votes in Furman versus Georgia. If this is a deep cultural difference between America and Europe, it shouldn't depend on 2 votes that could have changed and in which we believe now those 2 would have voted differently, certainly if they had known what would come next. That doesn't look like evidence of a strong cultural determinant. It looks like evidence of how capricious and contingent history is. David Garland, in his important new book, Peculiar Institution, America's Death Penalty in the Age of Abolition, argues that we should not think of the death penalty in America as exceptional. Instead, he says, regarding America as an exception to the broad and Western pattern, this account has shown that American history has been in the mainstream, sorry about the spelling there, mainstream of death penalty developments, and that its capital punishment practices have been affected by the same broad processes that have produced reform and abolition elsewhere in the Western world. And we see this in the fact that the death penalty after Gregg is more bureaucratic, as Weber would expect. It's more legalistic, reflecting the kind of values that Durkheim talked about in the rule of law. It's more adversarial. People used to be sentenced to death with hardly any legal representation. Now they have decades of lawyering. And it's far more civilized, at least in its appearances, right? So it's not the same death penalty. It's a death penalty that has actually responded to many of the same pressures that have abolished the death penalty elsewhere. How would our sort of main social theory toolkits, what kind of questions would they ask about the death penalty? And here I just want to get you thinking in terms of your paper about the way that these toolkits prompt us to ask questions. So when we look at Foucault, again, we don't find answers in any of these theorists. We find questions. So Foucault's question to us, I would say, is what positive effects does the death penalty produce? Right? We can easily see what positive effects the death penalty does not produce today. It does not produce a lot of executions. It does not produce powerful public rituals like the Tyburn executions. But does it produce anything? What does the death penalty produce today in America? Anyway, what positive effects? Not positive in a normative sense. You don't have to like them. But what things does the death penalty make happen in the world that wouldn't happen without it, presumably? Please. So even if we're not able to execute very many murders, the fact that we have a category of capital murderers, aggravated murders, and we got prisons full of death row inmates who are sort of zoos of Hannibal Lecters and other really scary, or many of them really scary offenders, may serve a function morally of allowing us to focus on, for various reasons, super criminals. I mean, those reasons can include titillation, right? It's exciting to read about Hannibal Lecter type guys. It's much more exciting than just sort of plain ordinary murder. It can include dealing with our own fear, because thinking about really scary people who are now under control and facing execution may reassure us that we're not going to be scared. Those are positive effects. What other kinds of positive effects might you say the death penalty produces in America if it doesn't produce dead bodies or dissections like it used to? But what else do we get from the death penalty? Even here in California, where we haven't had an execution in, 6 years? What do we get lots of? What are you going to hear in November if there's a ballot initiative about the death penalty? I'll predict it won't be an execution between now and November. But what might we get between now and November?
There will probably be a lot of rhetoric about the permanence of behaviors in society forever.
Well, I think you stop right in your first 3 words and say there'll be a lot of rhetoric. I mean, the one thing that death penalty reliably produces in America is rhetoric, right? And rhetoric isn't nothing. I mean, talking about death when it's a serious possibility is a powerful thing, right? Just as it was a powerful thing to be able to take a body and turn it inside out in front of a bunch of townspeople to show the power of the king, it's a different kind of power to talk about the death penalty, but it's still a kind of power. And in America, in which democracy goes down to a very low level, that is, we elect almost every kind of office holder in America, which is quite different from much of the rest of even the democratic world, the ability to talk about something people really care about, even though all you're doing is running for dog catcher, is enormously attractive and pays real dividends. And indeed, we can think in more instrumental ways. Police officers typically advocate in most states that have the death penalty for an aggravating factor in the penal code that makes it a death sentence to kill a police officer. Well, again, that's rhetoric, but it's also a way of defining their role as more endangered, more facing more violence. They deserve earlier retirement, bigger pensions, more insurance, etc. So these are not purely ideological, right? They have a political, they have a economic dimension. So it surely does that. It surely operates a whole network of pro-law enforcement lobbies that, even if they don't get executions, can use the death penalty as a wedge against other reforms. It's very hard to talk about getting rid of life without parole when you still have a death penalty to talk about. So it has that kind of effect. If we turn to Durkheim, we ask the question, what values does the current death penalty express? And there I think you find some real puzzles, because as much as for my own personal value reasons, I might want to denigrate the death penalty as representing values like vengeance, racial hatred, undying fear of outsiders and immigrants, I also have to admit that the death penalty reflects values like the demand for racial equality. Right? Think about the execution of the murderers of James Byrd in Texas, the man who lynched Byrd in a deliberate recreation of a classic Southern racialized lynching. So the death penalty, one of the reasons it survives today for Durkheim is that it expresses many of the same modern values, concern for the individual, concern for equality, that traditionally opponents of the death penalty had a monopoly on. But in a sense, the retention of the death penalty has put it back into play. And then to look briefly at the Marxist tradition, how does capital punishment preserve the legitimacy of a highly unequal social and legal system? And there I think you just have to consider, again, the drama of the death penalty, how it plays out an image of great fairness and justice, cases that are litigated over and over again, right? Remember how George W. Bush used to say, the courts have considered this case 18 times, and I'm not going to, second guess them, right? So there's a tremendous image of carefulness to the death penalty that often seems to reassure that even the most despised and outcast will get a measure of legal protection. I want to return in conclusion to Justice Brennan's concurrence in Furman, because I think he holds in his, his decision, which I'd like to imagine last week, having been a majority opinion, if he could have gotten 2 more votes, represents a vision, and I hope to develop this at the end of the course in a little bit more detail. What I would call a dignity-based critique and argument, critique of the death penalty and argument for abolition. Let's just revisit what Justice Brennan, and I did not ask you to read from it, but I gave you some quotes from it before. Here's some more. He wrote back in 1972, death is today an unusually severe punishment, unusual in its pain, unusual in its finality, and in its enormity. No other existing punishment is comparable to death in terms of physical and mental suffering. Now, I noted that, ironically, when Justice Brennan wrote this in 1972, it was particularly a contrast with prison sentences that were quite lenient, and in which parole was almost always available to people facing a life sentence. That's changed now, and certainly after Brown versus Plata, it's hard to argue that the death penalty is the only penalty that involves significant risk of suffering, physical suffering and mental suffering, because we know that prison does that as well. But I think he underscores something that's a problem for the Eighth Amendment in both prison and the death penalty, which is the lack of humanity when it comes to physical and mental suffering. The contrast may not be there, but the larger message that punishment, if it does predictably produce physical and mental suffering, is not compatible with human dignity, remains a big problem, I think, for the American death penalty, as well as for our prison system. And that there again is the link between pain and torture. Death remains as the only punishment that may involve the conscious infliction of physical pain. You saw the Supreme Court say, well, there may be some irreducible bit of pain, and that would be allowable. In addition, we know that mental pain is an inseparable part of our practice of punishing criminals by death, where the prospect of pending execution exacts a frightful toll during the inevitable long wait between the imposition of sentence and the actual infliction of death. And that long wait is where I put my main objection at this point in history to the kind of death penalty we have. When Justice Brennan wrote this, he was anticipating waits of 4, 5, 6 years, possibly between a death sentence and execution. Now, in California, it's more like 25 or 30 years. And I think there the question of degradation becomes tremendous. This is, again, inside the Brennan concurrence. Quoting first from People versus Anderson, which was the California Supreme Court's decision striking down the death penalty under California law back in 1972, the process of carrying out a verdict of death is often so degrading and brutalizing to the human spirit as to constitute psychological torture. And notice, not just for the prisoner, but also for the people who have to carry out the execution. One of the most interesting and understudied features of the death penalty is the impact on the executioners, the people who have to work for the Department of Corrections who actually carry these out. And even in Texas, actually especially Texas because they've had so many, there are many employees of the Texas Department of Justice that are on disability because of their psychological injuries of experiencing this. And it was Justice Frankfurter who noted back in the 50s, the onset of insanity while awaiting execution of a death sentence is not a rare phenomenon. So again, that was in a period when people waited a year, maybe 2 at the most. What again are we to make of a case like Vail versus Florida, which I talked about in the first week of class? That's a Florida case where a man was executed 33 years after coming to death row. And to me, this is a real stopping point. I mean, I'm 50, how old am I? I'm 52 now. So think about it. Is anyone in this room 19? That would be kind of on the young side. There's a 19-year-old. He's 19. She's 19. So you could be sentenced to death in California and any other state without violating Roper versus Simmons. So imagine one of you two get sentenced to death row now at the age 19. Is there anyone in the room who's 33? Close to 33. No one will admit it. Okay. I've got a couple of almost 33s. All right. So imagine that. So he comes into death row at 19. He gets executed when he's me at 52. And in between is her and her. An entire 33-year-old life. That's as long as Jesus lived before he was crucified. And that doesn't count, right? We're going to execute you for what you did at 19. Now that you're 52, even though you lived 33 years and the life you lived, it doesn't matter. We're not going to evaluate whether you were a decent person in prison, whether you threatened other people, whether you tried to live a dignified life. I think that's where the morality of the death penalty is going to come under intense challenge in the near future, as it did for Justice Breyer here. Nonetheless, you will not have to deal with that on the midterm exam, which is probably mostly on your mind. So I bid you good luck in your preparation for that, and I will see you a week from today when we resume our study of the Asian death penalty.